Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. We are live. I am joined today by Max and Durst, and we are going to be covering the tight end class as a whole coming out of summer scouting. But before we begin, Durst, we did the Florida show last night. We're back on again tonight. Anything earth-shaking happening in your world right now?
Nothing too bad in the last 24 hours. How are you guys doing?
Doing pretty good. Max, I think this is the second podcast that you have done with us. Maybe it's the third. So definitely welcome back. And anything special going on in your life right now?
I got a wedding next week. That's kind of the only thing going on, and obviously not mine. But things are pretty quiet over here. I'm really just kind of getting all of the off-season stuff that I wanted to get done right now and just finishing it out. Because obviously this is going to get on us pretty quick. And then it's just reacting to what's going on in front of us. And at that point you can't do anything. So, it's pencils down. So I'm trying to get that all in and cram that, but yeah, things are pretty quiet.
Okay. Well, this podcast came out. We're trying to do this with every position. We're just as at Draft Professor, we are trying to just go through what does that class look like coming out of summer scouting. So Max, you said that you've watched about 15 to 20 tight ends so far.
Yeah.
And anything popping out from the tight ends that you've watched? Anything popping out to you as a positive, negative, or this is just the way the football world is?
Well, I think as far as this class goes, I think there are a lot of guys that people are excited about that just don't have the bodies to really hold up. So I think either those guys are going to, continue putting on weight. I think some of them are. Or they're not, and I think that they're going to get filtered out by the increased scrutiny that comes when we get closer to draft time, right? I mean, I think that the timbre of summer scouting is extremely permissive. I think that we're always looking for the good in guys around now, and we're always looking for guys to get excited about. But then when we get closer to draft time, we're looking to tear them down, and we're looking to go through their games with a fine-tooth comb. And a whole bunch of guys that we thought were going to be these high picks, some guys that we'd even hyped up going back 2 years, going back to their true freshman seasons, they're gonna get filtered out. It's a very strenuous process, and I think a lot of things get figured out. So I think there are a lot of guys like that I can see right now are going to end up in that bucket. There are a couple guys at the top that I actually quite like, and there are a few guys that I think if they do, a thing or two or show me a thing or two, can join them. So I think that this class does have potential. I think it's a more normal tight end class than last year, where we had two superstars, a couple other guys who are tight end one in a class type of guys. Obviously, I think three went in the second round last year, two of them very early. So, that's usually when you start to see your first tight ends go, and they were the third and fourth off the board. So I think that it's going to be a huge adjustment period for people coming back to a normal tight end class. But there's some guys here that I quite like.
Okay, so Durst, who do you think are the normal tight ends in this class?
Normal tight ends, yeah. So one of the reasons I'm really excited to be on this podcast with Max is, I want to throw a couple of flowers there. I subscribe to his Substack, Remember the Tight Ends, and he's had a couple of really good articles out recently, one in which he's got his top 10 tight ends, and I forget if it's NFL history or maybe the last decade, I think is what it was.
Yeah, it was the last 25 years.
Yeah, and then he's got a part one, part two, which is defining the difference between the wide tight end, otherwise known as the inline, and the what is ambiguously referred to as the F tight end or the flex tight end. And I'd love to hear. I've heard him talk a little bit about the the wide receiver test, and that the F tight end does not sort of have the ability to line up as an inline tight end, and he needs to basically be a better receiver than some of the slot receivers or some of the other guys that could be on the field to take their place. So I have a feeling that a lot of my tight ends that I've studied more under the lens of the receiving backgrounds or maybe not backgrounds as much as their traits. And a lot of these people, I think, are probably going to fail Max's, tight end or a wide receiver thresholds and so forth. So wide receiver test. So I've got one guy that I have a top 50, projection for him. I got three guys top 100. I got six guys that I would put as a fringe top 100, round three, round four. I've got two that are like back to school. I've got three that are just playing day three. And then I've got like four more who I'm just calling fringe draftable. But again, I'm ready to kind of get my list tore down by the creator of the wide receiver tests.
So explain the wide receiver test. Max, I didn't know you had a Substack. I will go find it after the show. But explain the wide receiver test that you use for a tight end.
Yeah, so essentially football is a game of opportunity costs, right? Anytime you're limited to 11 guys on the field, any position you have on is costing you somewhere, right? And you have your staples, your 5 offensive linemen, your quarterback, 1 running back, and 2 wide receivers. So if you look at NFL personnel usage, there's very, very little 10 personnel. There's very little 22. There's 13 is the most common of the unusual ones, but it's 12, 21, and 11. So you have 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs, which is a running back and a fullback, or 2 tight ends. And that's going to constitute an enormous majority of NFL snaps, to the point where if you're making major roster decisions based on the fringes, that's going to impact like 3% of your snaps total. That's not great asset management. So for practical purposes, it comes down to those 3 groupings. And so within that paradigm, the offensive line is going to stay the same, 5 of those. Quarterback's going to stay the same. 2 receivers are going to be out there, and you're going to have 1 running back. Whoever the 11th guy is going to determine what you're in. So if that guy is a second tight end, that means you are precluded from having a 3rd wide receiver on the field. So unless that guy can truly flex out and not flex out in the way that most tight ends will sometimes flex out and run sheltered route trees. I mean, really flex out and truly earn a snap and target share and route share as a true slot, you are cutting off huge amounts of your passing game that a 3rd wide receiver would afford you. So if that guy is if a second tight end is going to be that guy for a significant portion of your snaps, he's going to have to, or at least a majority of your snaps, he's going to have to clear that threshold of the opportunity cost that you're taking out, because slot receivers block now a lot too. And so they can absorb a lot of that blocking repertoire, not all of it, but a lot of it. And so you're just hamstringing your passing game by having a second tight end out there in a lot of cases, unless he is able to be so good and so versatile that it just doesn't matter, like a Travis Kelce. If you're in 2 tight end with Travis Kelce and he's flexed out in the slot, it suddenly truly becomes 3 wide receivers. But if it's like Dalton Kincaid or somebody like that, you're losing something.
And it's funny. So if you didn't know, I'm a Bills fan.
Right.
And about 2 minutes ago, I was like, you're describing some of the problems with the Bills offense, which was top 5 in like every statistical category. But to me, some of the problems are Dalton Kincaid is the opportunity cost for that 3rd wide receiver to be on the field. So I see exactly where you're going.
Right, especially since Khalil Shakir and Mac Hollins are in the formation digging out support all the time, which is basically, 90% of what Kincaid would do as a blocker. But Shakir is more maneuverable. He's quicker. He can space the field more. He can work those underneath and intermediate zones with a lot more quickness and agility. He can separate better on DBs, which is what Kincaid would get matched with because defenses aren't really going to take him seriously as a big body in the core. And there's a rotational role for a Kincaid type, but it's just not going to be a huge amount of the snaps. And their best grouping last year was 11 with Dawson Knox at tight end blocking in line. And their next best grouping was 12 with an extra offensive lineman in Dawson Knox because of what they got in the run game. So yeah, that's really, he's far from alone. The Bills are far from alone in that, but those guys just have trouble getting on the field.
So, Durst, when you were going through your list, if I heard that right, you've got about 4 tight ends in your top 100, and you said 3 more that are outside the top 100, but you could see the path for them to get there?
Well, yeah. So I so 1 top 50, 3 top 100s, and then like 6 guys that are like on the fringe of the top, 100. But
Okay. So
again, I'm
who
kind
is
of
in your
looking at
top
this
50?
through the lens of more receiving. And again, what Max is here to kind of help a little bit is like this is sort through how many of these people really cannot pass the wide receiver test, but also can't pass the tight end test. Basically, they're not stout enough to be a inline tight end, and so therefore they're going to be competing against slot receivers for reps as a flex tight end. If I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah, you got it. Because the Y is going to be there regardless. Like you need a Y tight end to be that 6th line of scrimmage element, which is key geometrically in the run game. The F is not part of that. So that's one of the fixed positions. You're going to have that guy regardless, and that guy's going to have to block in line if you ever want to run the football. So yeah.
I think the mistake that like most fans, most draft analysts, and honestly, I think a lot of NFL teams is they do get enamored by the guy that looks like Travis Kelce when you're watching the college football games, but
Mhm.
he's not really Travis Kelce. And so, if he's not really a full-fledged tight end, and he's just a Mike Gesicki, and he's Dalton Kincaid, and he's Noah Fant, and he's an Isaiah Likely, and he's essentially not going to be probably as profitable in a sense as a full fledged tight end would be, or a full time slot receiver would be.
Right. They're certainly creating less value than an inline guy because the inline guy, like an inline guy that can catch, is doing whatever he's doing as a receiver, but he's also able to occupy that spot in the offense, which does really 2 things. One, it gets them better matchups. So a lot of teams, you can easily put, like the Dolphins did last year, they put Jonnu Smith at the Y a ton, and he ate, and he put up huge numbers, and it cost their offense dearly as a whole. They had an inability to run the football because of their offensive line, but it was a huge limitation for them. So those are empty calorie numbers. Those in the overall scheme of value. That's the fact that guy's putting up that kind of production in that spot is a negative. And so the ability to occupy that spot credibly is huge because you need that guy to run the ball. And so if the guy that's filling that role can also catch it, that's a bonus pass catcher on the field for you, which is huge. And you also have especially if they're really good as a blocker, you have people distill it down, the extra value of an inline tight end as the blocking itself, but it's the blocking and the ability to credibly put a pass catcher in the inline spot, which is huge for overall asset allocation, because you can get into 11 and you're fine, especially if you're going to need that slot receiver to be able to dig out support, but that's really an attitude and teaching thing as much as anything. So you're fine. If you get into 11 with Dalton Kincaid, you're screwed. You can't run the ball. So that's something you only do on 3rd down. So yeah, it's huge. And I think that, these flex guys do put up numbers sometimes, but it's not real in the sense that a true Y is, because they're in their home and they're not disrupting that they're not creating that opportunity cost.
Yep. So, Durst, did you say one tight end in your top 50 and 4 total in your top 100?
Let me look at that again.
Curious about who the top 50 guy is.
Yes.
Yeah. So could you drop those 4 names for the audience?
All right. So my number one is Sinyan Sadiq, who is small and who I think has a chance to be able to pass the wide receiver test for what little reps he got last year. He's got a lot of explosiveness to his game. He's done a lot of end arounds and sweeps, done some fourth down, kind of things. He's just a really high level athlete. But I think he's listed around 6'3", 245, and I think there's some question. He grades pretty well in terms of PFF, in terms of blocking ability, but in terms of just like eyeball, watching him on film, I would not think that he's going to be a very good blocker. So, do we think that Kenyon Sadiq would pass the wide receiver test, Max?
Probably not, just because I think to truly clear that threshold, like there are two and a half tight ends right now that clear that threshold. Because George Kittle does not apply because he can block in line. Anybody that can block in line credibly is exempt, because they can just occupy that spot if you need him. But Kelsey we'll see with the age, but Kelsey obviously throughout his career has clearly been one of those guys. He's just a 6'5", 250-pound Drake London. Mark Andrews is on the border. We'll see. He certainly has been over that threshold early in his career, but we'll see how he comes back year 2 off of that ankle injury. I think he still looks good on tape, so I'm willing to give it to him. And the other one is Brock Bowers, who is one of the most athletic players to ever be listed at this position, who, if you go watch him, I was watching him side by side with Jack Besh this year just to see the relative movement. And Bowers, obviously, he's got elite long speed. A lot of tight ends do, but what's really the difference between tight ends and receivers, obviously the average speed is going to tilt heavily toward receivers, but it's the maneuverability, the ability to decelerate, because when you're moving at speed at a higher weight, you do create more momentum, and it is much harder to precisely throttle down, change direction, stop and start, and maneuver. And so you have a lot more inherent inefficiency in that movement, and that allows defenders to close on you really, really easily in and out of your breaks, especially if you're playing in space. Now, if you're playing at the Y, totally different proposition. But when you're playing out in the slot like that, even guys like Isaiah Likely, who's a great athlete, Dalton Kincaid's a good mover for the tight end designation, but it's just such a high bar because receivers are just more athletic. It's similar to the coverage difference between a corner and a safety. There are a lot of safeties that can cover. There are very few safeties you can put on the outside and put in at the cornerback spot. They would get toasted, even the good ones. So I think it's really rare. It's really rare. And if a guy to me is going to pass that, he's going to have to truly change direction at an elite level. And to me, Sadiq he's a great athlete. I mean, he's fast, he's explosive, he's very linear, which concerns me a little bit. Like, I don't know if he's going to be able to snap stuff off the way a slot receiver will. However, he is a great linear athlete. He's explosive. He's fast. He does remind me so much of Isaiah Likely, to the point where, it's sometimes you gotta work to find a comparison, but this just feels 1-to-1 to me. They're so similar, because Likely, the difference to me between Likely and Andrews is that Andrews has that maneuverability and Likely is very linear but explosive. So I don't think he can, because it's rare. It's a long-winded answer, but I think as a rotational 12 personnel guy, he is actually quite dangerous. Like, I think he's a lot like Jonnu Smith, who, you don't want him playing a huge snap share, but as a rotational guy, when you get into 12 personnel and want that, that extra almost fullback type blocker in the formation who can stretch the field a little bit on a sail, on an over, pop behind the linebacker, slide into the flat and be a threat, and then, get off the field when you want to access your more true drop back game stuff. That's a useful piece. I just don't know about it in the top 50. However, another thing about Sadiq is that I do think he has weight to put on. He's one of the guys that I was sort of driving at when I was talking about people putting on weight. His lower body is very big and it's very strong. So you'll see that a lot of times with him as a blocker, where he will get more push and more power generation than you would expect given his slender frame overall because of that lower body. So that raw lower body strength does intrigue me. If he can get up to a true 245, then this might be a different proposition, because I think he will be a little bit stronger than that weight, and I think he could potentially develop into at least a passable inline guy with a little bit more mass. I just think he's a little slight right now, and he is young.
So, Durst, who are the other tight ends that you had in your top 100?
Yeah, so it is three more guys that are more traitsy receiver based. So it's Max Clare, former Purdue, transferred to Ohio State. Eli Stowers, who is a former Texas A&M and New Mexico State, now at Vanderbilt, and then Lawson Lucky. So, I think there's some similarities between all three of these guys also being kind of linear, especially Lucky. I think is like extremely linear. So I put it down kind of a vertical seam stretcher. Lucky's 10.7 A dot tops the list of the 2026 prospects, but he lacks play strength, including he's got 0 catches on 7 contested catch opportunities and 0 missed tackles forced, which I really hate. So, I know things kind of go into that are always not always within the player's control, but he seems like a very linear guy. And then I got Eli Stowers, explosive athlete, Texas high school state state title. He's got a natural pass catcher with excellent ball tracking hands and yak ability, but he's an undersized flex tight end, and I'm not even so sure he's that great of a separator, and he's extremely weak as a blocker. And then we got Max Clare, who I said is a very fluid route runner with good hands and ball tracking, can catch outside of his frame. He's got some pretty good explosive ability as well. A natural sort of space creator, knows how to get open. But again, undersized, question mark. Blocking, kind of question mark. And by the way, he's also probably in the deepest tight end room maybe ever at Ohio State this year. So, Max, what do you think of Max and Eli and Lawson?
Well, I think Lucky to start is probably going to need another year, and I think he'll probably take it. Just because I think he needs to get bigger, and I think he needs to develop technically as a blocker. I think it's hard for him to ever get in line because of the other tight ends on the roster last year. Obviously, Delp is still there, but Eurosec was ahead of him on that. But it wasn't never. And he's got some real technique issues as a blocker, which I think is a little bit actually encouraging, just because I think those are a little bit more malleable and understandable than pure strength issues. But I do think, it's hard to tell. And I think he probably has strength issues given the size, because he's like 6'3", 235, 240. So that probably won't play at the NFL level. Probably need to get up to a legit 245 if he wants to be anything. But there's some. He's like you said, he's a really nice seam stretcher, and he gets behind the linebackers well. He's a good play action threat, so I could see him potentially being a decent rotational guy in the league. If he ever learns to play in line, then that's going to be a huge boost to him as a pass catcher and just as a player in general. But I think he's going to need another year, and I think he's going to need a year where he takes over as the guy once Delp is gone after next year. And Stowers, I don't know what to do with him, because he does actually have quick feet, but I don't think he really has the true juice as a separator to really play in space at the NFL level, which worries me. He's fun with the ball in his hands, but he's like 225. Now, he played quarterback, he's switching to the position, and he's supposedly putting on weight. So if he shows up at like 240, a real 245, 250, and is a similar athlete and has the play strength to maybe at least play in line serviceably, he becomes like a really, really good prospect. But I need to see him put on weight first. And, we'll see because so many people say that this player has put on weight. You see it every training camp in the league, right? Where this 29-year-old player is supposedly put on 15 pounds of muscle and maintain the same athleticism. Like, no, they haven't. They're going to end up looking exactly the same, and their game is not going to change. So you always take that with a grain of salt. But he's certainly a fun player. It's just an offense that the tight end is allowed to just vibe and do whatever the hell he wants because nobody's blocking in line with how much option they run, which is fun. It's great for him. But I'm worried about that. But I do like the quick feet. And he's definitely a playmaker. So I could see him having a rotational role in the league as well potentially. But as far as like a top 100 pick, I'm trying to draft starters. Max Clare, on the other hand, I love. I think he's awesome. He is slight and undersized, but I think he is probably a legit 240. I think he needs to get to like 250. I would like to see that by the time he's in the league, but he's pretty young. And he does look pretty thin. So I don't think that frame is necessarily maxed out, pun not intended, but from a technique perspective, I love him as a blocker. I think he's actually really good. I think he has strength that is above his 240. I think if he were to try to block in line at the NFL level right now, it would be tough because of that, but his technique is good. He was asked to play in line at Purdue. He was making, all the typical difficult tight end blocks, your base blocks and duo, your down blocks and gap scheme, driving guys off the ball, head up, your outside zone turnouts on the front side. Like they asked the world of him as a pro style inline blocker. And I thought he delivered, which was surprising. I did not expect, that was not what I expected to see when I turned him on a few weeks ago. So that I loved, especially when you combine it with the fact that he is an incredibly productive receiver. He is a great athlete. He is smooth. He's got great quick feet. He's solid after the catch. I think he has at times a little bit of balance issues as a route runner, but that's not like a huge thing. The results are obviously pretty good. I just think he could stand to get a little bit more precise and efficient, but I have no reason to believe that won't develop with more and more reps, especially as he gets into his mid to late 20s. When he gets into the league, he'll be fine. I think if he can get to 250, he's got a chance to be like a real dog. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Sam Laporta, especially at Iowa. And another guy that I thought was, at least, looking back as a prospect, is a much better blocker than he was given credit for. And of course, he's translated solidly as a blocker, and I just think he's that kind of player. I think he's awesome. And I think at Ohio State, he has a chance to really, go nuts with the fact that he is going to play at the Y with Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith and whoever, ends up being the third receiver ahead of him on the defense's order of operations. So he's going to get great matchups, and he's a top flight receiver right now at that position, and it's real.
So if I understand like the wide receiver tests, and I'm going to kind of regurgitate it back with some of the guys that Durst mentioned, is that if the tight end if we can't check the box that they're going to be an inline blocker, you want to judge them more like a big slot receiver. And actually, I think you mentioned Jack Besh. So like last draft cycle, I remember people saying Harold Fannin and Jack Besh played the same position. Right? Like, right. If you're not going to use Fannin as an inline blocker, they're both playing slot.
Yeah, they're both. Well, it's some systems codify it like it's the adjuster. That's the position. It's the F. It's the adjuster. It's all the same bucket.
Yeah. So out of all of so Durst, at this point, you've listed 4 players, right? You listed Sadiq, Claire, Stowers, and who's the
Lucky.
And Lucky.
Yeah.
How many of those 4 would classify as they have enough upside to become an inline blocker?
Claire for sure, because he's doing it. He just needs a little bit more weight for it to translate. And he did it at the Power 5 level. Like he did it against the same competition he's going to play against at Ohio State. Loved him against Penn State particularly. Like he was on big NFL level DNs and he was handling business. So probably Claire. I think Sadiq has a chance if he's able to bulk up, but I think Claire is I think he'll be able to do it. He's the one guy I think I can, obviously, projections may be wrong, but like he's the one guy that I think can be projected to be able to do it until at least without seeing anything else.
But like with Stowers, are we projecting him as only to be an F tight end? He's not going to be in line.
We'll see. I mean, if he shows up at 250 and it's real and he's got the strength to do it, maybe. It's weird with position change guys, and he's obviously older, so that's a point against him as far as frame maturity, but you never know again with these position change guys. So as of right now, not a chance, but who knows what's going to happen with him.
Yeah, he could be that guy that was he was the Eagles tight end that threw the Philadelphia Miracle. What's that one called?
The Philly special, Trey Burton.
Yeah. Philly special Trey Burton. So he was the I think the Florida Gators quarterback at one point in time, and then moved around and maybe played some H back, and then then ended up being a wide receiver, then ended up being a tight end. So I think Stowers can end up being that kind of guy as maybe his floor, but we'll kind of see what what he ends up being. But so maybe turning around the wide receiver test. How good of a blocker do you have to be? And let me preface this a little bit. Max has some really good articles talking about their blocking responsibilities and how they differ between the Y and the F. And of course, F will sometimes get some very favorable matchups against smaller nickels and maybe some safeties, maybe a chip block against a linebacker. A lot of times it's a bunch formation where the Y has to go against the defensive end. He's got to go against maybe a really good pass rushing edge. So there's difference in terms of the run blocking, but also the pass blocking responsibilities. And so how good of a blocker do we have to be before we say we trust you enough to be a wide tight end? I think the general public is like, well, this guy's good enough. He no longer has to do the crap job of cleaning the toilets, and he gets to go play the F tight end because he's a really good tight end. But the more I'm learning, I think it's more of like, no, you get to play the white tight end because we can trust you enough to keep our quarterback alive. How good do you have to be?
Well, I mean, first of all, if you want to get on the field, your best path to do it is a wide tight end. The NFL is so desperate for the NFL fundamentally needs inline blocking to run the football. So they're willing to pay John Bates and Drew Sample and Brock Wright and Josh Oliver extensions, and these guys cannot catch the football. Josh Oliver a touch, but like they're willing to pay without that. And so if you're one of those guys that can, imagine if you can, like imagine given that, like how much teams are going to value a Tucker Kraft who blocks like them and is also going to give you 750 yards and is a serious yak threat. That's like, or George Kittle, who's the biggest offensive force multiplier since Gronk. I mean, Gronk was worth, Scott Barrett did this breakdown of Patriots spreads with and without Gronk. He was worth 6 points, which is like, I mean, almost quarterback level, which is absurd. So the value, these like, I think the idea where the flex tight ends are the kings of the position is totally inverted. The wides are the kings, and so if you can do that, that's your path to value and your path to the field. But as far as how good you have to be, I think I might need to make up a new term here because
go for it.
There's always it's always good when you have a punchy line like Sam and Steve, when they were with PFF almost way back in the day at this point, had what they called the Matt Ryan inflection point for what a great NFL quarterback was. And you kind of have the Phillip Rivers inflection point for what a Hall of Fame NFL quarterback is. And so to me, you have the Sam Laporta line where if you are a better blocker than Sam Laporta, you're good. if you're Sam Laporta, he's good. He's good enough. Or no, maybe TJ Hawkinson, because TJ Hawkinson's I think is worse at this than Laporta. It's kind of similar. But like that, TJ Hawkinson, Sam Laporta is the inflection point. Below that, you're just going to get dumped by DNs, and above that, you're insane. But that's sort of you just have to be credible enough that we can ask you to make any block, and you're not going to kill the play every time. Sometimes you will, no matter what. That happens to everybody, but that's sort of the line.
Okay.
Hey, quick shout out to Scott Barrett, DFB, the particular article that Max is referring to. There was he did a tweet, Scott did, about look at the top 10 tight ends of the last 20 years. All had a winning percentage of .550 or better. And then he ended up by putting the top 10 or so wide receivers, including the Calvin Johnsons and a bunch of people. And it was nowhere near as good. So it really kind of shows the value of a tight end, of what their winning percentage was. For Gronk was number 1, Travis Kelce number 2, and Mark Andrews number 3, Shannon Sharp number 4, Heath Miller number 5, George Kittle number 6, Jimmy Graham 7, Antonio Gates 8, Jason Witten 9, and Greg Olsen 10. So all 10 of them had a winning percentage, which was like very high, and they brought so much value to their team for their ability to kind of deceive others, because you didn't know if they were going to be a run play or a pass play.
Yeah, I mean, every single one of those guys except Kelce was, is a credible inline blocker. Even Shannon Sharp was able to do it, even though he hated it. But he did it. And they were able to run the ball at an elite level with him on the field. Obviously, they had Terrell Davis, and they had, Alex Gibbs, and they were running the hell out of the ball. So they weren't losing that by putting him out there. The confounding variable there is that they all had great quarterbacks, if you go down the list, and that tends to have something to do with it. But at the same time, there definitely is something to be said about tight ends as the serve breaker. So you have to keep that. And if you're if you're just an F only tight end, your receiving is not breaking serve. It's holding serve. Now you have to be able to actually hold serve, because the guys that are below that wide receiver test threshold are losing serve. Whereas a Y who can catch the ball at an elite level, or at even a solid level, they're breaking serve for you, because they're giving you an extra guy that shouldn't be there based on the rules of the defense.
You mentioned the quarterback, and actually, before Brock Bowers, or during the Brock Bowers draft cycle, I tweeted out that there's 4 things that a tight end needs to be like highly successful, and 2 of them are basically out of their control pre-draft. So I wrote down athleticism, toughness, your NFL quarterback, and then your play calling head coach. Because I feel like so many of these first round busts, if you go back, it's like, well, they didn't have a good quarterback, or well, look who their coach was, or and so it feels like that that the best tight ends, the ones that were Hall of Fame or borderline, had the best quarterback. So you kind of allude to that, and that's kind of been my feeling why I was a little reluctant to even have Bowers as high as a lot of people had him. And it's because, well, we don't know where he's going to go. And what if he goes to a place like the Raiders with a bad coach and a bad quarterback? So now he ended up proving me wrong. Obviously, he had
and now he's got a quarterback.
So now he's got a better quarterback, and I think a better coaching staff as well. But he did it even before then. So obviously, what do you? Why are my 4 things wrong when I look for those 4 things in terms of am I oversimplifying it, or is there another path there?
Well, I think you're correct as far as what makes a tight end productive. But I think that the difference between a tight end and a wide receiver is productivity does not necessarily mean you're good. Like Johnny Smith, for instance, he's fine. He's a solid rotational piece, incredibly productive last year. And there are other guys whose production takes a nosedive from year to year, like David Njoku, for instance, who's one of the best tight ends in the league. because of, their quarterback situation. Tight end is more sensitive than the other positions to support, to what's around them, to disruptions to their plate, to, going from a good play caller to a bad play caller, going from a good quarterback to a bad quarterback, all that stuff. But it doesn't change who they are as players. David Njoku is the same player, whether he's putting up 850 yards and 10 touchdowns or 400 yards. So but it is true about productivity. Like it's very sensitive to that stuff. Unless, even Travis Kelce, like his numbers blew up with Mahomes, and that's obviously pretty normal. But especially if you're playing in line, that it gets very sensitive to that stuff. It just doesn't change who you are as a player.
I think it's more important to evaluate tight ends on the plays they make, not the volume.
Right.
So like from a wide receiver, we have volume metrics about the number of targets, but the likelihood a tight end is going to approach 150 targets like some of the top wide receivers get. To me, that's part of it. So again, I'm a Bills fan, and Dawson Knox gets a lot of hate from the fan base. It doesn't come from me, but like good stats. Again, Dawson Knox shows up in the playoffs. Prior to 2025, Dawson Knox caught the first touchdown pass every year that Josh Allen threw a touchdown pass in the playoffs.
Wow, really?
Right.
That's
awesome.
awesome.
James Cook was the first touchdown this year.
I ruined it.
Right. So Dawson Knox shows up at the big moments. Right. But he's not going to pass too many of the volume stats. He's not he's your 13th fantasy 13th fantasy tight end. Right. Like he has like no statistical value based upon volume. But to Max's point, he's a really good inline blocker. That doesn't show up on the stat sheet, but he's a good enough blocker that he stays on the field. And that's part of the metric. So one of the things that I'm learning as we go through this is I'm going to listen more to how well does the tight end block, like when we do scouting reports and such. Durst, I have a question for you. Who were the 3 tight ends that you had that were fringe top 100?
Yeah, so actually the fringe ones was actually 6.
Okay.
So Justin Jolly, NC State, Luke Haas, former Arkansas, now at Ole Miss, Brent Norfleet, Missouri, Jack Indries, former Cal, now Texas, RJ Maryland, and Oscar Delp. And so I've kind of heard it through the grapevine that Max is a big fan of Oscar Delp. Is that true?
That is correct. Yeah,
So
he's my number one
I'll
guy.
go with why I have him a little bit lower, and I'll have you kind of tell me why you like him so much. So I do have him as a true inline wide tight end who combines play strength and polish. In 2024, he displayed a complete package, but wasn't a consistent playmaker. Delp has the ability to find the holes in the defense, can seal off, and maintain edges. But under weaknesses, I thought his yak was kind of weak. I thought his explosiveness and in terms of his receiving, it wasn't very good. And he only caught 1 of 8 career contested catches. That's 1 of 8 contested catches in his career, not just last year that he converted. So that's why I do have him a little bit lower. But again, that's all receiving, penalizations, I guess you could say. Maybe I'm not taking into consideration what a good blocker is. So Max, tell me more about Oscar Delp.
Well, yeah, it starts there, right? He's a great inline blocker. He's awesome. He probably would have been the best in the class last year, with Jackson Hawes, and I think that, and Tyler Warren as well, even with the arm length concerns, he was awesome as well. He's so strong. That's the thing. He just crushes people. But to me, he would have been the best. He's big. He's 250 plus. He's strong. He's extremely technical. He's refined. He's balanced. He's controlled. His base is great. His hands are great. He knows how to time everything up. So he's what great inline blockers look like. And certainly they don't usually look like that in college. So I love that. But you combine that and his ability to do that with the fact that he's going to be, I think, sorry about that ringtone. I don't, my ringer goes on automatically, but not automatically. I think I hit the thing, by the way, and I always try to have it off. And I don't know why this phone does that, or maybe it's my case or something, but I hate it. That's the thing that's
It's all
bothering me.
good. All good,
But,
Max.
But he combines that with the ability to really stretch the seams in the second level well. I think he's going to test quite well. He reminds me a little bit of Tucker Kraft in that regard. I think he's going to run in the low to mid 4.6s. I think the agility at times is actually pretty decent. The yak is I've seen it. I don't think there are very good opportunities for him to do it in that offense really at all, because he's only thrown 2 in the seams. And behind that second level, where again I think he's really, really good. But it'd be great if they could just leak him out into the flat on a on a bluff, or hit him on like a cross or on a boot or something, just to get him moving horizontally in the way that the Packers will do for Tucker Kraft, or just throw to him in the underneath zones more. And they don't really do that as much, in part because Lucky does a lot of that, and in part because Georgia's offense isn't very good. And again, that's
They threw a
another
lot
example.
last year. They used to be a heavy running team, and now they seem like they're throwing a lot. So I think that
Yeah,
play
because they
action
couldn't run it.
would
Their
have
run
worked
game
on that.
sucked. It was not by design. I mean, Delp was crushing people, but their run game overall was terrible. So that's just he's those wide tight ends get a lot of their production on play action, a lot of it just by nature, and so that's, I think, something that would really suit him well. Just pop him behind the linebackers, pop him on an over on play action, pop him in the flat. Like, I think you'll start to see if he gets those opportunities, the yak come out a bit more, because I do think, again, he's fast, and I think he's got a little bit of shift to him. I don't think he breaks tackles the way like a Tucker Kraft does. But I think that he can be fine in that regard. And again, I love him as a seam stretcher, and as a threat on like sails and corners and stuff. He'll never be a guy that pushes 900 yards in the NFL. He's a guy that's, I think is going to be a solid tertiary target who does this kind of stuff, who goes for like 650 to 850, 50 to 60 catches, 550 to 800, and blocks in line at an elite level. And if it's all relative, right? Like, if one of your line elements is giving you that kind of receiving production and threat, that is a huge force multiplier, and it's way more valuable than if somebody playing on the perimeter alone is. So that's what I love about Delp, because I think he can be that guy. And he does remind me a little bit of Tucker Kraft. I don't think he quite has the same freakish athletic juice. So I think he'll be slightly below that, but I think there's also a lot untapped for him as a receiver that we haven't gotten to see because of general dysfunction with Georgia, and how much they need him to block, and how much they honestly have needed him to pass protect because of how, the issues they had getting stuff picked up last year. So I think that's a little bit of an inhibitor for him as well. I think he's that kind of guy. I would have had him probably at the end of the day. Maybe I wouldn't have had the courage to go to draft day with it, but he was like, before everybody made their final decisions, he was potentially as high as 3 for me last year without seeing anything else. I thought he actually should have come out. So I love that guy. I think he's a dog. I think he's awesome.
You mentioned about did he have enough juice? A lot of people, including Math Bomb from our relative athletic score, and as well as Scott Barrett that we mentioned before, a lot of people feel that tight end's the most athletically dependent position when it comes to NFL projection. What's more than production? I never really see you talk too much about analytics. I think you're more of a kind of a film guy. What is your thinking in terms of measurables, whether or not it's relative athleticism score or even inline, tracking data? How do you feel that's in your evaluation, athleticism? How much do you value that?
It's critical. They're dead right. They're dead right. It is the most athletic position. it is a position that it is deeply difficult to be a high-end player, at least as a pass catcher, without being a plus athlete. But the emphasis is on relative, which is why I love RAS so much, because it actually does this and it relativizes it to size. If a guy is 6'2", 225 and plays tight end and is running a 4.63 and is, a low sevens in the three cone and, has a great split and all that stuff and is, high in the percentiles for tight end, that doesn't matter as much as if a guy is 6'5", 250 and doing it. But it's really hard because a huge part of the predicate of the position is being too athletic for linebackers and is being able to stretch those seams without guys being able to roll back and recover on you. So you do have to have that little bit of pace. It just is that important. The data doesn't lie on that. I think it's pretty robust. I think it's well substantiated, it's well studied, and from a film perspective, from an X's and O's perspective, there's a very clear reason for it. I think it makes total sense. It's obviously true.
So, Max, would you look at the characteristics for an F tight end as far as the RAS score? Do you want to see a different RAS for an F than you do for a Y tight end, or do you lump all of that athleticism into the same bucket?
Well, when I go on Mock Draftable, where they have the spider charts, the nice thing is that you can sort them by athlete, ball carrier, and skill player. And anytime a guy truly can't block in line, I always sort it by skill player. I don't even look at the tight end. Well, I do out of curiosity, but it just doesn't matter. It's the skill player one. And so when you pull up, when I pulled up, I forgot who I did this with. It was Harold Fannin and somebody else who was at least a solid NFLF tight end, and I compared them relative to skill players, and Fannin dropped well below the 50s in a lot of the movement stuff, and the other guy, again, I forgot who, but was held up. So I relativize it by skill player, and you can do that there. So relative athletic score, the nice thing is that it's a little bit by position, but it also does do size. So it does inherently sort for that. But on something like Mock Draftable, if a guy's not blocking in line, you got to go right for the skill bucket.
Okay. Yeah, I had a long conversation with Kent Lee Platt, who does the RAS score, when I was at the Senior Bowl, because I was actually trying to figure out his math, because I want to be able to program some of that into my site. But I thought he was using logarithms to normalize things. No, he says I was making it way too complicated. And I'm an engineer, so I overcomplicate everything. No, he just says it's just the average and you're dividing it by the sample size.
Yeah. Yeah, it's simple, right?
Yes. It was way simpler than I thought it was. But I like the idea of it. Basically, if I understand this right, if we look at the RAS score of a tight end that's projected to play F tight end, and the opportunity cost is with a wide receiver that you would likely be putting at slot, we would want to be comparing those RAS scores relatively similar. Is that part of the theory here?
It is, but it's not the end of it necessarily, because some of these guys do hold up, and then you watch them on tape and you're like, it's just not the same. That's why I was watching Brock Bowers and Jack Best side to side. And I was watching Harold Fannin and Jack Best side to side, and the movements because there's tight end movement and there's wide receiver movement, and you can see anytime you're just watching tape, watch the tight end and then watch the receivers. You can tell who is a wide receiver and who is a tight end, and it's not just because of their the number they wear or their formation. You can just see that there's just a difference, and it's because the receivers are lighter. It's not even about, again, I was talking about earlier, it's not even about straight line speed. It's about that overall maneuverability. I've on the extreme end compared it to the relative movement ability of a commercial jet versus a fighter. They're both moving very fast, but turning a commercial jet is a huge pain, and it takes forever to land, and a fighter can, go all over the place. So it's funny that you mentioned the sort of chopping it up with him about the math, because and I'm not a math guy, which is a huge inhibitor here, but I'm trying to figure out how to quantify the relative movement between these two positions with that, because testing doesn't to get it all of it. It gets a lot of it. It gets as much as you can, but then that's not to criticize testing. There's nothing more they can do. GPS tracking may be able to do it, but I'm trying to figure out the relative maneuverability, and I think that there's physics done. Obviously, I'm sure the DoD does this on all of the movement abilities of their fighters, where they've mathematized it, and so I want to figure out how to do something similar with overall change of direction. And not just stuff like in a 3-cone, because that's one specific type of change of direction, just like on every route, and overall maneuverability and overall ability to decelerate, and just really physical stuff, so that we can find a way to quantify the relative athletic difference between a tight end and wide receiver. And then we can essentially standardize the wide receiver test to some degree, because then we can say, oh, this guy's above the line, this guy's below the line, and then we can see it. Now it's pretty obvious. It's generally very clear on tape. But even then, even Kyle Pitts is I think coming out of college, if he were coming out right now, I'd have said, yeah, this guy totally passed the wide receiver test. Look at this monster. But not really. And then when you go back and you look at the handful of reps he had on Patrick Surtain and Trayvon Diggs in the Alabama game. Well, Trayvon Diggs wasn't there, I don't think, but Patrick Surtain and whoever the other guy was, these are NFL corners. Oh, you see the difference a little bit. So I want to find a way to quantify that. I'm just not a math or a physics guy, which is I can map out the theory of it. I can't execute it. So maybe I'll talk to him. Maybe I'll talk to somebody, but I think that that's the next step here. I think that we need to transcend all these other things, because it's going to get us close. And I think that watching tape can get us all the way there, but the ability to quantify things, and I am a big fan of analytics. I think analytics need to go further. I think we need to get much more specific with this. I think we need to get math people and film people together to join the theory and the calculation the same way, Albert Einstein and Oppenheimer would talk about how he's great at theory, he's terrible at math. We need to get those guys together, and I think that we can actually really figure something out here, and demystify and quantify a lot of the differences between receivers and tight ends, so that teams could stop screwing this up.
So we can talk when we close the show down. I might be able to help with the math part. Math has never intimidated me, unless it was the statistics class for my master's degree. But that's a different podcast for a different
day.
We
will be in touch about that, because math scares the shit out of me, especially when it has letters. It's too much for me.
So why don't we pause for a quick commercial? Max, do you want to let everybody know about Remember the Tight Ends and all of your other content?
Yeah, absolutely. As we've talked about, Remember the Tight Ends is a Substack. It's about a lot of this stuff, and it really colors everything I write. So it gets reiterated often, because it just always comes up. But I do film evaluations, I do film breakdowns, I do scheme stuff about how tight ends are influencing different offenses. I do player evaluations. Obviously, when draft time rolls around, I do a whole bunch of that. This past year, I pretty much only watched tight ends. It was weird. Certainly the first year, I've just skipped most of the positions. But I wrote a bunch of pieces there. During the season, it's just going to be a lot of week-to-week film stuff. I'm really, really excited to actually do this during the regular season, because I started it last December and I did some of the playoff stuff. But the playoffs are the greatest entertainment product in football. They are not great for theory. They are not great for evaluating league-wide trends as the year unfolds. So, when you go through the year and you look at, offenses are doing this, offenses are doing that, that to me is my favorite part of the year. And that is not just Bengals fan cope, as somebody who doesn't thinks they're serious danger of missing the playoffs again. As a fan, the playoffs are king, but as an analyst, I'm really excited to get into the actual beginning of the season and see what happens with these guys. So there's going to be a ton of that there. And everything I write ends up on my Twitter, which is in the handle below my name. If you want to find it, it's going to end up there, and I'm going to end up talking about it there. So that's a great central place to find it.
Durst.
Yeah, so you can find me at Durst NFL Draft, both on Twitter/X, and I write about a bunch of different positions. I did recently release a top 20 tight end board that we partially went through today. You'll find me on Friday back here talking a couple of quarterbacks. So I'm really excited about that. That's all I got for you right now.
Thanks, Durst. Thanks, Max. So, Max, I found your Substack. I just subscribed while we were doing that. So I apologize that I hadn't subscribed before. I did. Substack doesn't necessarily have the algorithm to know, well, if I'm following you on Twitter, of course you need to show me where they are.
Very true.
Which of my Twitter followers have a Substack? So, but that being said, you can follow the channel at NFL Draft Fanatic, no I in Fanatic. This podcast is daily. So every day we have a topic on the draft. On Monday, we covered the Texas draft class. Last night, we covered the Florida. Tonight, we're doing tight ends. Tomorrow, it's a mailbag with Devin Jackson. Friday, as Durst said, we're coming back. We're breaking down some quarterbacks. We have our first Saturday morning show where we're doing a draft team exercise. About 8 people will be building a team of 22 players from the rookie pool. So the first one of those every draft cycle is always the best because everybody's got players that nobody else has heard of. And then Sunday, Ian Cummings, Dalton Miller are coming on this podcast to do their top 20 corners. And the agenda continues. I could tell you what we're doing all the way up through Christmas, but I don't want to bore you. But we have draft content literally coming at you every day of the week up until draft day. So best thank you can give is to hit subscribe. But I should probably just close down the commercial, get back to the start of the hour. Max, are there any other tight ends in this class? I think at this point we've dropped about 10 names. Are there any other tight ends that maybe they're further down the board or maybe further down Durst's board? He hasn't mentioned them. But maybe they've caught your eye and you're really hoping to see them take a step?
Yeah, I've got some serious early interest in Daquan Wright from Ole Miss. He's a legit 250. There are it's tough to find true inline blocking reps in that offense because it's so not pro style and there's so much Y off stuff. But when they do run inside zone and they don't split it and they do run duo and you get those base and down blocks, I think he's got some serious strength. I think he's a potentially great athlete. He's a really explosive mover. He's got some quickness. We got to see him. We got to see him play a little bit more football. I think he took a lot of snaps away from Caden Prescorn last year, though. I thought there was a lot of impressive stuff when he did catch the ball and when he did run routes. It's such a spread offense, so it's tough to get the tight end in those positions to really contribute as a receiver. The more spread out an offense is, especially with those college offenses, and the more Y off stuff you get, the more that guy's basically just an H-back. And so, I wish he played for Michigan State or, another offense like that that's really going to get 2 tight ends out there that's going to use play actions. But I love the raw materials. Jack Velling, speaking of Michigan State, I think is potentially very interesting. We'll see how he is athletically. I think he's a potentially good athlete. I don't I don't know if he's going to necessarily clear that bar to really be a stud, but he might. He might. There are some reps and routes where I'm like, yeah, he is, and there are some where I'm like, yeah, no, he's not. So I gotta go back and forth on that. I think he's a nice blocker. I think he's strong. I love the offense, and I think it's going to develop him very well. I love offenses like that. I love those, those, not just those Midwestern heavy under center run games, but the ones that actually really use the play action and the movement off it at a really high level. And I think that they have a chance to be really good offensively. And I think that he has a chance to be a pretty big producer. He's been productive for them, dating back to when they were at Oregon State. So, I think that guy has potential juice as well. And, just pulling up, that was off the top of my head, just pulling up the whole class to make sure I don't miss anybody. I like Brett Norfleet as well. I think he might need another year because I think he's still developing. He's put on so much weight since he got out of high school, so he's kind of grown into his new body. But he's got a huge frame. He's putting on weight nicely. He's getting bigger. He's long in the arms too, I think, and he's got some pace to him. He's got some smoothness. So I think he could be another guy that's a solid, pop behind the linebackers archetype Y. And he's 6'7", so he's got like legit ability there. And one guy I forgot about, who I think has a chance to be one of the best tight ends in the country next year, who I would not be surprised if I end up with a first round grade on, even though I have no idea what he is now, is Eli Raridan from Notre Dame. I think the smoothness and the pace athletically are terrific. I think he's going to be another 4.6s guy. I hope. I think he's got a little bit more quickness in the feet and control than you would expect from a guy at that size. He's got a great frame. I think, I hope he'll be able to be a good contested catch guy as well, just because of that rebounder body. That's maybe not necessary with how well he blocks in line. He can stretch that second level. I think he can flex out potentially a little bit. Again, that control in the hips I really like. And he's like 6'7". I think 255, probably going to end up in the NFL at like 260, 265. So that's a guy who has enormous upside because of that stuff. And his tape is pretty good. It's hard to produce in that Notre Dame offense as a receiver. It's certainly hard if you're going to be a tight end, because with how much they block in line in that offense, how much they run the ball, and how suspect their passing game was last year. But he's got the tools, and if he puts it all together, he's going to be a stud. So I love that guy.
So Durst, any other tight ends that you want to mention?
Well, yeah, I'll kind of echo the Raritan as well. Unique athleticism for his size. I wrote down inline capabilities, and it might break out 2025. Now, he does have just 16 career catches. So he's got a lot of experience, but most of that's due to injuries. He's tore his right ACL as a high school senior, then retore the right ACL in practice in 2022. So that limited both in the 2022 and 2023 season. So hopefully this guy can get back to health, but I do really like him. I like Jack Velling, freshman All-American, Oregon State, enters his fourth season as a starter. I wrote down as that alignment versatile player with a good all-around game. I wrote down I thought he projects as a second or third tight end on NFL with some special teams value. I feel like he might be missing that elite trait, that speed and athleticism, but I do think he's got a really good all-around game. I mean, some guys that I think that probably deserve a little bit of talking that I just basically, briefly, mentioned was Jack Indries as well as Luke Haas. And Luke Haas especially because, Max, you already mentioned an Ole Miss guy, and this guy, Luke Haas also, is now transferred to Ole Miss. But he was a true freshman All-American despite a broken clavicle in 2023. Wrote down good play strength and reliable hands. We're talking 0 drops and an 87.5 career catch percentage for his career. So I think he could be a really good underneath target, but he's kind of small for an inline tight end. He played about 76% of his snaps were in line at Arkansas, but he's about 6'3", 242. So I'm interested in Max's opinion on this guy. Is he too small to play on in line? Is it more about play strength than size? Because I don't think he's going to be a great flex guy, and if he's too small to kind of pass the wide tight end test, then he may be a man without a position. What do you think of Luke Haas?
Yeah, I think he's a little small. Ironically, he's actually kind of a nice pass protector, just because he mirrors well, I think, but he's not much of a run blocker, certainly not in line. The tough thing about inline versus not inline charting is that so much of anything where a tight end is attached is usually sorted as inline, and that's a little tough. Like if they're off the ball, it's a totally different proposition. So he's in that Y off role a lot, and he's going to be so much at Ole Miss. So he's not really going to be blocking in line much at all. I just don't, again, I think his upside is another rotational guy, like sort of like, the Jonnu Smith types of the world that are those 12 personnel only tight ends. I don't think he has that level of juice though. So I think that might be tough. I just think it's just going to be, I think it's going to be hard to translate for him because we'll see what the athleticism is, but I don't think it's going to be in line. And I definitely don't think he has like the route running or athleticism to flex. So I think
he lacks burst, quick switch, and separation ability to create yak. So I'm like, I think he sort of had to get bigger and more powerful to play in line, but he may not really have it in him.
Right. I mean, we'll see. I mean, this position is it really is a terrible position to stake to build so much of my profile on because it does have a way of making you look like an idiot, especially considering Antonio Gates just never played basketball, never played football, shows up and it's like all pro in his second year. So again, it's that kind of position. So I will never rule anything out generally, especially with a player that's productive and talented. I definitely think he has a chance to potentially become a rotational guy. I'm just not seeing it necessarily yet, but you can't say it definitively. You just can't. Like, I'm definitely not going to try unless the guy's like 215 and thin, then anything is possible because he's good. He's a really good college player. LSU wanted him. And so I watched him a lot and that's kind of where I noticed a lot of the pass protecting stuff. So I was really interested in seeing how he was an inline blocker. It's just, he's like 240 and he's not thin. He's not a thin 240. So I can't imagine him getting to be much heavier than that, which is, it's tough.
Okay. Well, we could probably keep talking for a really long time. Max, as soon as we close this down, I'll see if I can schedule you to come on another podcast. This is
awesome. I'd love to.
This has been enlightening, to say the least. And this is much different, let's say, than the nearly every other flavor of content we have. Is way more structured than this. But I love the free-flowing conversation. Durst, you definitely added a significant amount of meat to this. So I appreciate everything that you did too. So for Durst, for Max, for myself, for the 85 podcasters at the Draft Professor, we'll see you on a podcast again tomorrow, everybody. Have a good night, and we'll see you soon.